Hey everyone, Tactics here, and as predicted today, we got our very first PTR update of patch 10.1, and it is live as we speak. And in this video, I'm going to be focusing on the very first set of class changes that we got. We're going to be talking through them, as well as all of the other kind of new things that we didn't learn about yesterday that is coming in this at least very first build of the 10.1 PTR. It is good to remember, though, that of course these changes kind of roll in on a week-to-week basis. So if your class or spec isn't in this first set of changes, I wouldn't doom too hard yet. It can, of course, happen over the course of this PTR cycle. So don't worry just yet. We can start panicking maybe in a few weeks. So let's jump into the actual notes themselves here. So just scrolling all the way down, this upgrade system, really cool post about that yesterday. I will be covering that in the next few days, not in this video though. But so we get to classes, and what we actually saw off the top here was pretty significant changes to both balance and feral druids. We also saw changes to Devastation Evoker, hunters across the board, Mistweaver monks. Shadow Priest saw a massive rework, see the notes here, and then some smaller changes to Enhancement Shaman. So starting off though with the two Druid specs, balance and feral both got pretty significant write-ups, as you can see here. I'll link this down in the description as well if you want it for yourself, but basically here are the big notes here. Stellar Flare and its interactions are so strong that it's best to take it in all scenarios and maintain it on a large number of targets. It is demanding to keep track of and makes balance ramp at the beginning of fights very long. Eclipse and effects that trigger or on entering Eclipse are so strong that they incentivize Druid to use Lunar Eclipse in all situations because it is faster to trigger, and there aren't enough bonuses to Starfire splash damage that it's optimal to target an enemy next to your focus target. So they're trying to address those three things here. Big write-up, not going to go through the entire thing, but you can see the actual change list here. So quite a few buffs, some nerfs, and some new talents as well for balance of druids. For feral, there's a pretty substantial change to berserk, so it's going to be changing to, it goes berserk for 20 seconds, while berserk generate 1 combo point every 1.5 seconds. Finishing moves restore up to 3 combo points generated over the cap. Shred and rake damage is increased by 50%, and combo point generating abilities generate 1 additional combo point, which is a pretty significant change here. And then the other just general changes here: new talent, some shred damage and thrash damage increased, and then Relentless Predator now reduces the energy cost of Ferocious Bite by 20%, down from 40%, and a cool animation increase as well. Some nice changes to balance and feral. Still coping that there will be Guardian Druid changes, but we'll wait for another build. Devastation Evokers here. They're thrilled with the reception of Devastation and the excitement players have expressed for the playstyle. In 10.1, they're going to be making targeted adjustments to a few of the talents to address a nuance of the Dragon Rage extension loop, where it can be optimal to aggressively cancel and recast Disintegrate back to back in order to maximize the effects of Feed the Flames and Causality. Specific behavior is unintuitive, and the below changes are intended to make fully channeling Disintegrate the more rewarding way to play, which kind of makes sense to me. Additionally, we're looking to add more options for area of effect damage gameplay with the new talent Raging Inferno and redesigned Imminent Destruction. So kind of adding flexibility to the spec here with some talent redesigns, some new talents, and some tuning adjustments for Devastation there, so something to look forward if you're an Evoker player. For Hunters, they're looking to update some active abilities that don't feel impactful while they're active, replace some talents that didn't work as well as they hoped, and also adjust some numbers across a few talents. Several changes have been made across all 3 specs that should make some talents more viable and exciting. Very, very good. Definitely recommend checking this out, of course, if you are a Hunter player. Hopefully some good changes there for you. For Mistweavers, of course, Song of Chi-Ji is now moved to the class tree, and what they said here: Ancient Teachings is a primary piece of Mistweaver's healing toolkit in Dragonflight, but its previous design was unreliable. A single Rising Sun kick's targeting could sometimes determine life or death for an ally. That level of variance between results on healing out of your direct control wasn't healthy for a spec, hard to agree. Our goal is to land somewhere in the middle. A single Rising Sun kick likely shouldn't save an ally on its own, but it also shouldn't condemn them either. This new design is more dynamic and capable of handling a variety of healing profiles, and we feel will offer greater reliability for Mistweaver's consistent healing. We'll be monitoring the feedback. Yeah, so a change like this could be either very good or very bad. It's going to depend completely on the redesign and how it's implemented. So here we see, after casting Essence Font or Feline Stomp, your Tiger Palm, Black Oak Kick, and Rising Sun Kick heal up to 5 injured allies within 30 yards for 150% of the damage done, split evenly among them. Let's see how that actually plays out. The idea is sound, but the implementation we'll have to wait and see, and I'm not a healer, so I'm not going to weigh in on that. We'll let the other healers discuss how that's actually going to work out, but it's good to know that that's kind of on their radar here. Some other new talents and some talent adjustments and healing adjustments as well to Mistweaver, which will hopefully help them out. Then, of course, we have a pretty large rework, as I mentioned both in my video yesterday and earlier on here, to Shadow Priest. So the targeted changes here are to Button Bloat. They say Shadow has more rotational abilities than most other specializations, and they're working to reduce this by having Mind Spike replace Mind Flay and by removing Mind Seer. On that topic, they said they feel Mind Seer as a spender was a worthy experiment, but the gameplay hasn't been smooth, and they're removing the spell and focusing on Shadow's AoE kit further with Psychic Link. Flooded rotation. So they say there are at times in the rotation where several spells are competing to be cast due to proc frequency and overall insanity generation, and they're adjusting some proc and the insanity generation of several talents for a clearer rotational flow. There's a lack of distinct builds with updates to existing talents and some new talents. They want to aim for more build-defining choices, such as investing in cooldowns, damage over time effects, critical damage, or shadowy apparitions. Finally, in PvP, in Dragonflight, Shadow has had access to more instant cast spells through procs and cooldowns than ever before. Because it was difficult to prevent Shadow Priest from scoring kills, we reduced their damage in Season 1. We're removing some of those problematic procs and cooldowns in 10.1, so there's going to be more counterplay to Shadow's offense. This allows them to ease up some of the damage nerfs, so maybe looking better in 10.1. So a ton of changes here. Again, I'm not going to read every individual thing here. I'm sure a lot of you don't really care too much, but if you are a Shadow Priest player, definitely check this out. There is so much going on for Shadow Priest on the PTR in this first build specifically, so be on the lookout for all those changes and listen to some Shadow Priest creators. I'm sure they're going to post their thoughts on it as well. Finally, the last class that has big changes, or spec rather, is Enhancement Shaman. So a few talent changes have been made in an effort to allow you to opt into a reduction of the frequency and number of keybinds that you feel required to play as Enhancement. You're hoping that the changes to Thorm's Invocation and Static Accumulation make your lightning spells your primary spenders and not require you to also use Elemental Blast. Changing Fire Nova to deal Flame Strike damage should help the talent feel more viable when focusing on a physical damage build. Interesting too, because if you know the Holy Strike damage changes to Ret, interesting that they're applying that to Enhancement as well. So a few buffs here or changes here for Enhancement Shaman. And again, reminder, these are not the only class changes coming in 10.1. If you saw like the other builds as well, they would have a bunch of them, of course, come out initially, but every week we tended to see more and more changes. So if you didn't see your class here, it's not the end of the world just yet. We can doom in a few weeks. There is actually one other significant change I'd like to point out here, specifically the interrupt duration changes. Now, this is under the PvP section, but it notes that this is a game-wide change. Now, they say this change should have minimal impact on other content due to how creature spells are generally designed. However, I actually think that's pretty untrue for high-level Mythic Plus. For example, spells that tended to have a long cooldown usually were stoppable, right? So you would use a displacement effect, a stun effect, a disorient to prevent the cast from going off, and it would go on cooldown. However, what you would usually prioritize kicks were on spammable spells. So if you think of a spammable spell, you've got like the Thunderstrike, I think it's called, on the Thundercaller in Halls of Valor, right? You've got the Storm Bolts in Noku Defensive, or the Necrotic Bolts in Noku Defensive. You've got the Hydro Lances in Temple of the Jade Serpent, right? Spells that would just be spam cast either at your tank or at a random target that would deal a ton of damage, and once you kicked it, they would just start casting it again as soon as their interrupt duration was done, right? Those are the dangerous spells that are now going to be cast much more often because every interrupt basically got a second off of the interrupt lockout. Using an interrupt on a stoppable spell with a longer cooldown would basically yield the same effect, but again, in high-end groups, a lot of the times you were only interrupting those if you absolutely had to. For example, like the Necrotic Bolt Volley in Noku Defensive on the Lieutenants, not a stoppable ability because the mob isn't like stunnable or CCable in any way. So you would just kick that, and the cooldown is longer than the lockout, so it didn't really matter. However, like I said, there's a lot of spells that are particularly dangerous because they just chain cast it either on random targets or your tank that are now going to be potentially a little bit more dangerous, potentially require an extra kick in the rotation to keep them kicked, which could have some repercussions for sure. So I wanted to actually emphasize that there because it does actually have more impact than you would expect, especially if they're saying it doesn't really have that much of an impact. So some spells it does, some spells it doesn't, but good to note. The other thing, of course, we have the bosses in the Dungeon Journal. So 9 boss raid. Bunch of, generic bosses here, but notably Neltharion is actually in the list here with a bunch of very rare trinkets based on classes. So, there's one for Warrior, Paladin, Mage, Demon Hunter, Evoker based on area of effect spells. There's one here based on debuffs for Rogue, Priest, DKs, and Druids. And then there's one here for summons for Hunters, Shamans, Warlocks, and Monks. The last boss is going to be Scale Commander Sarkareth, which I believe was the guy in the cinematic, the Drakthir guy. Looks like he has a very rare cape. We don't know what that cape is going to do yet, but looks like that's what the very rare item off him is. And notably is also, here it is, the two-handed Agi Staff, a very rare from the middle of the raid here. So, Survival Hunters, Feral Druids, Guardian Druids, maybe Monks, depending on if they want to use a two-hander. If it's good enough, I'm assuming they will use the two-hander. So, two-handed Agi users rejoicing maybe if they want the effect. Of course, it does mean that your base weapon is going to be very rare. So you may be having Hunter Pains that they were this patch, but cool to see nonetheless. And then aside from that, there is a general very rare trinket as well in the journal off of the very first boss. So some interesting things here in the very first PTR notes. As always, I will be covering all the changes in the Temple 1 PTR over the next couple of months. And this PTR cycle is actually very far ahead with everything that is up on this first PTR. So maybe we get some raid testing soon. Who knows? When it comes to loot stuff, like I mentioned, I'll be covering that when they do their next big loot post, which should be coming soon. So be on the lookout for that video. Make sure you do like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Let me know how you guys are feeling about the current class changes down in the comments below, the loot, the raid, all that good stuff. Big shout out to all my Patreon supporters. Your support means a lot to me, and I appreciate it so much. Otherwise, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.